This is the China-Hollywood Greenlight podcast, episode number 7.
And rolling sound. Quiet.
Here we go. Ready.
Speeding. 120, take 7.
And action.
This is Karen McCann, the host of the China-Hollywood Greenlight podcast, a podcast about creating and distributing content for both Hollywood and China. If you like the show, please go to iTunes, subscribe, and leave a rating so other people can find the podcast. The more we work together, the more opportunities will be out there for everyone. Any links mentioned in the podcast can be found in the show notes, as well as a full transcript at my website, thechinahollywoodgreenlight.com/podcast, and look for this episode, which is number 7. Before I introduce today's guest, I'd like to start out with a motivational quote to encourage our listeners to continue on their path to achieving their own green light. And today's quote is a Chinese proverb, which goes, "The journey is the reward." Today's guest is Sky Moore, a partner for Greenberg Glusker, who is involved in major China-Hollywood deal-making. He has an explosive idea on the future of U.S.-Chinese co-productions, but also offers advice on what to do if Chinese currency stops flowing into Hollywood. Here is the interview. Well, today's guest is Sky Moore, who is a partner in the corporate entertainment department of Greenberg Glusker, practicing entertainment, corporate, and tax law. He represents various entertainment professionals, including producers, sales agents, foreign distributors, and financiers. He has handled some of the largest financing transactions in Hollywood, including the Hunan Group's slate financing for Lionsgate. He is the author of several books, including The Biz, the basic business, legal, and financial aspects of the film industry, and Taxation of the Entertainment Industry, plus the book What They Don't Teach You in Law School. Mr. Moore has been named one of the top 100 entertainment lawyers by The Hollywood Reporter, as well as one of the top 25 entertainment lawyers by Variety, plus one of the top 100 lawyers in California by the Daily Journal, and one of the top 3 most influential lawyers in the media by National Law Journal. He was an adjunct professor at both the UCLA Law School and the UCLA Anderson School of Management, teaching entertainment law and finance for many years. On top of that, he has a great YouTube channel, Sky Moore Attorney, which he uses brief, entertaining videos to teach the basic business side of the film industry. Well, welcome, Sky, and thank you for coming on the podcast today.
My honor. Thank you so much.
Well, I've told the audience a little bit about you, but why don't you tell us about yourself personally and more about your business?
I do the corporate side of the entertainment industry as opposed to the talent side, and I represent financiers, producers, and distributors, many including in China. I do a lot of cross-border work because of my tax background, and so for years I've done a lot of investment in Hollywood from various foreign countries, from India and Europe and Japan and Korea and now China. And so I do single picture films, I do large slate financings, I do mergers and acquisitions. I kind of span the globe.
Wow, that's fantastic. Well, let's start with. I know in the business, no 2 days are the same, but tell us a couple things, 2 or 3 main tasks you do on a, quote, typical day.
On a typical day, just looking at my schedule today, I've got a seminar on China I'm doing actually at 12:30, so for Digital Hollywood, and I have a merge. I'm selling a company for about $50 million that will hopefully close in the next couple of days, and so we have closing calls going on that. And then I just sold The Irishman to Netflix, which was the biggest sale, the biggest film that they're going to produce. It's going to be a very expensive, large-budget film being directed by Martin Scorsese, starring Bob De Niro and Al Pacino and Joe Pesci, and so that was fun, and we just finished that. And then I represent Chinese companies investing in Hollywood and buying rights, and that's on the agenda today to close a couple of films for one Chinese client, and represent Morgan Freeman and his production company, and I represent Sophia Loren and her family on a number of, one of her sons is a director, Eduardo Ponti, and so I'm working on that actually today. So it's kind of a wide range of things.
Well, you mentioned just now that you're working with Chinese companies buying some rights. How do you find your business partners, and how do you suggest the listeners find Chinese partners?
They come to me through referrals. So because I have the cross-border tax expertise, I am often one way or another brought in on or the first call of transactions that are cross-border. So for me, it's typically referrals. I have gone to China and done the rounds where you and I guess that the answer to the second question of how do you get clients or how do you get business partners is, number one, it's Beijing is really where it's happening. Second is Shanghai, but really Beijing. And it's just connections. So it's you meet somebody and you ask for them to introduce you to other people, and you get some ability, and you close a transaction or two, and you show that you know what you're doing, and then you kind of get accepted in the circle, and you go out and drink with them. Although I don't drink, but I pretend. And so but it's networking is really the key, because it's in China in particular, it's all about relationships and personal relationships. So you just have to call your network like LinkedIn or something and find out who knows somebody, and then just work it from there.
No,
reputation. You've got sorry, and then you have to really check reputations. That's also critical in China, and so you have to figure out who you're dealing with and ask around.
Well, 2 follow-up questions on that. If you're not, well, first of all, when you go to, assuming you don't have a lot of connections, when you go to China, or if you advise someone in the audience to go to China, are you talking about, if let's say you're not a lawyer, go to a film market?
If you don't have any other way, yes, you would go to the Shanghai Film Festival or the Hong Kong Film Festival or the Beijing Film Festival, and just start meeting people and do everything. Just go there and meet people if you have no other way in.
And following up on the reputation, that's an excellent idea. And of course, due diligence is part of your job. There's a lot of stuff in the trades, a lot of press releases about people. Suddenly there's all these film funds. How do you suggest the audience find out if someone's real, if the reputation is real, or if the money is real?
You just have. Well, first of all, if the money is in China and the theory is that they're going to get it out of China, the only way that's happening these days is if they're buying rights for China distribution. So if they're purporting to invest in a film to get profits from worldwide or something like that, like a co-production, that is likely not going to happen if the money is in China. The only way that's going to happen is if the money is outside of China. The only money coming out of China these days is if it's for the acquisition of film rights that will be distributed within China. So that's comment one. And so you have to make sure that the money is in Hong Kong or just somewhere out of China. If the theory is they're going to invest in Hollywood. And then even then, you've got to really check reputations, and you just start asking around. And then, I now know who to ask. I can ask pretty quickly, but you just have to ask around and figure out if they're real or not.
Okay, that could be your next book: how to find Chinese partners.
Yeah.
Now, I'm sure some people are want to have a smooth going, but it doesn't always work that way. If you could. There's always going to be obstacles on certain projects. Can you talk a little bit about an obstacle that you encountered on a past project, and how did you overcome it, and what did you learn?
Many obstacles. One is obviously the language barrier, and that's actually can be a very significant obstacle because the Chinese often are proud of the fact that they speak English and often don't bring a translator, and often their English is not quite as good as one would hope. And so the language barrier can be a very significant issue. So one of the keys is having a good translator with you, and not relying on theirs. And then the second is there's a vast cultural difference that is just remarkable. In China, it relies on trust, and relationships, and whereas in the U.S. we rely on contracts and law. So you have to get used to the fact that you have to get people that you trust, and they have to trust you. And even after the contract is done, they don't necessarily follow it, because in their minds in their minds it's a living relationship, and therefore things can change, and the contract is really just kind of a handshake. And so you really have to get used to that, which is quite different. And they often don't view the United States as really on an equal footing with China, and therefore they're more willing to make promises in the United States that they don't keep, because they don't think the blowback will be as significant as if they don't keep their promises in China. So there's a lot of, oftentimes, and you can read it in the press many times, where there's deals that have supposedly been made, but then they don't honor them. And it's really because, we're over there, and therefore we're across the ocean, and it's different rules apply a little bit. So you have to be aware of that.
Well, how did you overcome it if a deal went bad?
As the lawyer, and in particular, if I'm representing the Chinese company, I have to try to explain why we're shifting directions, which is not always the easiest task. And if I'm on the U.S. side, I simply make sure that that's not going to happen by making sure money's in escrow, making sure that we don't start production until the cash is actually in the account. That we just assume, we kind of make the assumption that we're not going to get paid until when in fact we've got it locked down. So you just don't make moves until you're really protected.
Just a side question. I've read somewhere that if you do the contract in Hong Kong, you have a better chance of fulfilling that contract. Or are these contracts signed? Where are they signed? Or what?
It's not where they. It's not where they're signed. The governing law.
Yeah.
We try to make the governing law in jurisdiction U.S. But even then, when you do it, you end up with a judgment in the U.S. But then you've got to go enforce it in China unless they've got assets here, and that's really impossible. So the reality is that the contracts don't mean much because because they can't be enforced as a practical matter unless they have assets here. So you really have to just get the cash. I mean, if you're on the receiving side, you just have to make sure that cash is locked down somehow.
If that's not an option, would there another option be you just have a Chinese law firm partner, a law firm in China that's your partner, and they do the contract?
No, because even if you have, that doesn't really get you anywhere. Even if you've got jurisdiction, and even if you can, you're just not going to win in a China court. You're just not, and so there is no practical enforcement mechanism other than what is it that you can do? Can you hold back delivery of the film? Right. Can you? What is your leverage in a non-contractual setting? You just have to always think of it that way. It's almost like there's no contract. What is your leverage to make sure that the parties fulfill whatever their obligations are?
Okay, well, speaking of challenging situations, that leads to my next question. Excuse me. If you could magically solve two pain points, what would they be?
Pain,
like problems. What challenges?
Two problems.
Yeah.
Well, it's hard. Boy, there's so many. I'd solve the language problem. I guess I'd solve the language problem. I mean, in a perfect world, I'd solve the language problem, and I'd solve that they would actually honor contracts and view them as the same way they do in the U.S., which is that you're supposed to follow them.
Let me put it like this: if there was like something you'd like to solve this week, what would that be?
This week, I would like to solve North Korea because I actually think that. Okay, I'll tell you why. Because I think that the relationship between China and the U.S. is going to pivot on whatever happens in North Korea, and so I think I don't think you can talk about China anymore without talking about North Korea because that is going to be the immediate problem.
That's an interesting answer. Thank you for that. Let me ask this. What sort of future projects are your clients looking for? Film, TV, genre, budget, and what do you think the Chinese studios are looking for?
They've really turned inward right now, and the market's been so big there. Wolf Warrior coming in at like over like $900 million US. So they're quite. My clients are either doing Chinese productions in China, and I've got U.S. clients that have gone to China. China. If you're in China, it's a totally vibrant market. It's what the U.S. was 30 years ago. It's growing. It's vibrant. There's a lot happening. So and to the extent they're doing anything in the U.S., it's looking to acquire films that have worked, like franchise films that have worked in the U.S. For example, that worked in China. I had a client that bought, there was a film called Escape Plan that worked very well in China, and so I had a client that bought the sequel rights to Escape Plan 2 and 3. And then there was a film called Now You See Me, and they did the sequel to that, and so you see a lot of acquisition of films that they think will work in China, particularly franchise films that the first one worked in China. So you'll see a lot of that activity.
Is there a difference between your American clients, what they're looking for, and what the Chinese studios are looking for?
Yes, China. U.S. companies are always just looking for money, and Chinese companies are looking for content. So. That's really the big difference.
And are the Chinese clients? Is there a particular? I mean, you mentioned Now You See Me and Escape Plan. Everybody knows about Wolf Warrior. Is it a lot of action movies they're looking for? A certain budget range?
Different budget range. Action adventure. Action adventure.
Okay, great. And then what are you trying to accomplish this year? Is there another book planned or something like that?
We're waiting to see how they're having a big government meeting later in October to reappoint the new chairman or whatever, the premier, whether Xi Jinping, which we think will happen. And the question is whether they loosen the currency restrictions. So everything turns on the currency restrictions. Right now, the currency is just shut down for money coming out from China to the U.S. And so really things have slowed down to a crawl. And unless that gets opened up, it's going to stay at a crawl, except for activity going on in China. And I've got clients that have just gone to China, and that makes sense. So I actually think the currency restriction is going to stay in place, and therefore I just think it'll be steady as we go. I'll have clients buying more film rights. I will have clients doing activities in China, but I won't be seeing the big slate financing that I did before, and I won't be seeing cross-border M&A activity.
Okay. Well, it sounds like you are balancing a lot. That leads me to my next question, which is what skills or talents are essential to being effective at your job?
At my job, being a lawyer, as opposed to
dealing with all these these contracts that might not be enforceable. These very unusual circumstances that you deal with every day.
A lot of it is. I'm good technically. I am. One thing you do need to be technical because it's cross border, and therefore there's a lot of whether it's securities or corporate or tax. So you do. I have a broad knowledge base that helps in the transactions, but beyond that, you really need to know that to kind of bridge the cultural gap. And to pick one example, Chinese clients view lawyers completely differently than clients in the U.S. In China, lawyers are like secretaries, and they're because contracts are so not important. What happens is the principals negotiate it on themselves, and then they turn over some piece of paper to the lawyer, and the lawyer is basically supposed to type it up. And they completely treat them with disdain, and it's like you're a secretary. So when they come to the U.S., they kind of bring that with them, and they walk into a meeting, and there's the U.S. side has a bank of lawyers, and the Chinese at first are walking in naked, and they get killed because they don't have lawyers. And they graduate. So you have to kind of educate them on the important what lawyers in the U.S. negotiate the deals and really do the business side and are pivotal in the transaction. And you need to be aware of that, and you need to bridge the cultural divide. You need to know that they work off relationships and trust, and you need to earn therefore you need to earn their trust. And then you need to when things get hot and heavy with the other side, which happens all the time, there's always miscommunication because of the language problem, and because they typically don't bring translators or frankly, sometimes not good ones. There often is miscommunication, and things blow up. And then so I often have to call up the other side and mollify them and say that's not what they meant. They didn't intend that, and life is beautiful, and let's move on, and to try to get to a close, to again bridge the cultural divide. When people step on each other's toes, because it can go the other way too. That the U.S. side says something that the Chinese take as insulting, even though it's inadvertent, they can get very excited about that, and so you have to explain, no, it's not what they meant. And, I act as I call it the translator, but it's really a cultural translation rather than language translation. Is actually a big part of what I do, is calling up both sides and getting them to stay friends. That's a good way
to put it. You have to be a diplomat, it sounds like.
You have to be a diplomat. You do. You have to be a diplomat, and there's tempers and there's egos, and you just have to kind of get through it, and that's a big part of the process.
Great. Well, this next question is a little bit tricky. What question did I not ask you that I should have?
Well, I've alluded to it, but you really need to ask the currency issue. What is, because the key thing that's happened since January is it just completely turned on its head. There was $10 billion of money that came from China to Hollywood in the last, from 2014 to 16, and then in 17 it's just shut off, and I mean shut off. So everything is, everyone that had a contract breached it. And no new deals are happening, and it's all because of the currency restriction. And what's happening is, and it's important to know the reason behind that. There's a couple of things. One is that China wants the Chinese companies to invest in China, but another is absolutely the Trump effect. That is, China is absolutely wants to keep their powder dry to see what Trump does, because just to pick one example, again, North Korea. And I will tell you, if the taps are turned off intentionally, because it's a loud message to the U.S., which is they were a big driver, at least of the Hollywood economy, for 3 years, and that tap is off, and they're waiting to see what Trump does. And I think people are underestimating the impact that has, and I think people are totally underestimating the impact that North Korea will have. You cannot. If there is any military action in North Korea, you're going to have a very unhappy China, and the very threat of it is making a very unhappy China. And there have been loud, vociferous threats so you already have a very unhappy China, and that's you can't overlook that. You can't just talk about China and the U.S. in a vacuum without really looking at the geopolitical implications of what's happening. And I don't see it lightening up for 4 years.
Well, let's assume we don't go to war. I hope. What would need to happen to mollify China, do you think? that we want to work with China? That Trump wants to work with China. I mean, this is way off topic, but I'm curious.
No, but it's important, which is right. He would have to stop the chest thumping and you'd have to get back off North Korea, and you'd have to back off this whole anti-China rhetoric, and embrace them and treat them as equal partners, trading partners, like we do Europe. Although that's become contentious too, remarkably.
Yeah.
But you have to embrace them as partners and not as the evil empire.
Okay, well, I can see where Trump needs to hire you too, so they need your advice. Yeah. Speaking of advice, this is my last question. What advice can you give those aspiring to tap into the Chinese market?
I say go to China. Another important thing is people we're all hoping that co-productions would work, and I will tell you that has been shut down. And it's not just shut down because the Great Wall didn't work. It's shut down because of the Trump effect. I just had a film try to get through SARFT, which is the China government approval agency for films, and they just hammered it because it was a U.S. co-production there. And I've been told that there's an unofficial now policy that they're not going to clear any more U.S.-China co-productions. So we had to shift to be making it a German China co-production. So first comment I would make is, if you've got U.S. producers, make it a non-U.S. China co-production. Make it a German UK something, because China is now focusing on Europe. That's comment one. And comment two is, I would just go to China. I've got clients that are directing in China, producing in China. And a lot is happening in China, and they want U.S. expertise. They'll pay dearly for it. They like that. They want to learn. So I would just say, go to China.
Now, these clients of yours that went to China, they they obviously have a film that they're going to shoot there, so they must have a Chinese partner before they can even go there.
No, they went there, and then they just started getting clients and productions going while they were there. Wow. They offer themselves as being able to offer whatever services that they do, and there is a huge demand for it.
Okay, well, I hope to have whoever those people are on the podcast. But thank you for that advice. That's fantastic. Now, in conclusion, could you tell us, plug some projects, any social media handles, or any website links you'd like to share?
You were very kind and covered most of it. So I've got a YouTube channel that if people search Sky Moore Greenberg Glusker, they'll find, and it's my course. And then I've got the book, of course, The Biz that you mentioned, and I'm on LinkedIn and Twitter and whatever else is out there.
Okay, we'll put that in the show notes. Great. Well, yeah. Sky, thank you so much for this information. It's been really useful, and amazingly, I just love the conversation. So thank you again for coming on the podcast.
You are too kind. Thank you so much.
We'll see you at the premiere.
Okay. Thank you.
I have 3 key points, as always. The first one is, how do you know Chinese money is real? Well, as Sky said, you've got to check your future partner's reputation, and you have to ask around to figure out if their money is real or not. Then the Chinese money needs to be held in an account outside of China. Number 2, if you're having a meeting with a Chinese partner, don't rely on their translator. Bring your own. And number 3, as Sky says, remember the U.S. legal system isn't on equal footing, so promises made in the U.S. by Chinese partners may not be kept, since, according to Sky, some Chinese feel that there won't be much blowback back in China. So what do? You could hold back delivery of the film. You have to ask yourself, what is my leverage in a non-contractual setting? And for takeaways, I have 2. First, Sky's explosive comment about the future of U.S.-Chinese co-productions was startling, to say the least. He feels the taps have been turned off intentionally due to the Trump effect. What can you do? Well, Sky said, get a European producer on your team. Make your co-pro a German-China co-pro or a UK-China co-pro. And number 2, if the currency restrictions don't lift, in my opinion, and perhaps you're a writer or producer, I would suggest try to film your script in China. Now, for the episodic part of this podcast, this is where I tell you about my own journey to getting my own green light for my film and TV projects. Number one, well, I've got three. Number one, I rewrote my action thriller that originally was going to be shot in South Korea, now to be shot in China. Also, the Chinese version is done, so I can start sending that script out to the Americans as well as the Chinese producers that I've met with. Number two, I did contact Pinewood Malaysia regarding a script of mine to be shot in Malaysia, and I will follow up with them next week. And number three, based on Sky's interview about the future of U.S.-Chinese co-pros, I am rewriting a script of mine that can be either now a China-German co-pro or a China-Canadian co-pro. As you see, I am using my guests' advice, and I hope you are too. Now, in conclusion, I'm also looking for more guests for my podcasts. So spread the word. And if you'd like to join the podcast or would like to recommend a guest, send me an email at podcast@China-Hollywood Greenlight.com. Thanks for listening. And thank you again. To show your support, go to iTunes, subscribe, and leave a rating so other people can find the podcast. The more we work together, the more opportunities will be out there for everyone. And I'll see you at the premiere. Bye. 一会儿见.